I'm glad you all can make it here safely, but before we start, let me ask, by a raise of hands, how many of us drove here? Okay, by a raise of hands, how many of us walked? Okay, well, no matter how you actually got here, I'm sure one thing, you all used some form of digital technology to get here. Whether it's Apple Maps, Google Maps, maybe even Uber, you all rely on some form of digital technology to become familiar with this surrounding area. Oftentimes, it's easy to overlook these everyday conveniences which technology has granted us. In our modern world, where these fast-paced technological innovations are the norm, it's all too easy to overlook the marvels which surround us. In fact, we become so accustomed to these conveniences that we take them for granted, rarely taking the time to actually reflect on our usage of such tools. Now, before I give my further thoughts and opinions on this topic, let me start with a little bit of background. You see, when I was in elementary school, I grew up in the type of family where my access to technology was somewhat limited early on. However, I've always had a great time using it in the classroom. Early on, these gadgets were used for strictly educational opportunities, where we were allowed to browse the web for problem sets, textbooks, maybe even educational games. However, over time, I couldn't help but notice a shift in our relationship with technology. What once served as a tool strictly for enhancing educational experiences began to morph into a pervasive distraction for myself and my peers. The limitless reach of the internet encouraged half-hearted completion of assignments, and in a rather poetic sense, rather than flipping through yearbooks, finding the occasional sharp-eaten mustache, everybody around me was flipping through their phones, having short bursts of laughter and mindlessly scrolling away. Essentially, rather than assisting us on our tasks, technology acted as the catalyst for a reduction in our attention in school, transforming what were supposed to be moments of learning into moments of fleeting distractions, overshadowing the importance of focused attention in school. Now, I want to make this clear. This really does go beyond just the topic of school. In fact, I'm only talking about the classroom here because it's a very common environment that I'm sure many of us can relate to. Consider this. How many of us here can remember 10 or more phone numbers right off the top of our heads? Well, I know that I sure can, but it's often like the old saying of having to walk uphill both ways to school, and how my parents and family members reminisce about the days where they used to remember 70 or more phone numbers right off the top of their heads. Think about the implications here. As we increasingly sacrifice and surrender our cognitive abilities to technology, what do we sacrifice, right? Although, for example, the task of having to memorize phone numbers may seem very trivial, it really does reflect on a broader trend in the evolution of our large and possibly concerning reliance on technology. So, with all of this in mind, we need to consider, at what cost then do we take part in scrolling through our phones, seeking temporary amusement and shallow engagement? Well, I believe that this question hits at the core of a bigger topic, the intersection of human memory and technology. As we increasingly rely on digital devices for information, we risk losing our ability to engage deeply, think critically, and retain information, all crucial skills for effective learning. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not up here today claiming to be a guru who vouches for not using social media or banishing myself from using generative AI. No. However, I do recognize the importance of striking a balance in our usage of such tools, as well as realizing the importance and the effects of our digital habits on our cognitive abilities. So, our question at hand is now, how can we control this balance effectively? How can we be sure that we don't fall victim to limiting our own memories, and that we properly utilize technology? Well, I think the best place to start is by comparing ourselves to the very gadgets we use. Although it may not be initially clear or apparent on how we can compare the human brain and our learning patterns to that of a computer, I find it to be quite ironic on how we can map the effects of these distracting technologies on the human brain to the fundamental logic of a computer itself. So, let's get into it. When bringing back the discussion on engagement, retainment of memory, and critical thinking, we need to consider, what does it actually mean to think critically? Well, to think critically, we need to be able to know, and we need to be able to remember what's good from what's bad. Our brain makes all of these decisions based on past memories and past outcomes. Now, whether these past memories are from the distant past or from an instantaneous processing of a current event, the funneling of information into our decision-making process involves the retainment and processing of lots of long-term and short-term memory in our minds. And ultimately as humans, we decide to take a route, make a phone call, decide what to eat for lunch, or decide how to spend any of our other time, all from the accumulation of these memories. So, it's not just our brain's raw processing power relevant in our decision-making process, but it's in large part due to our memory. Well, this whole process I just described is strikingly similar to that of a computer. So, although the whole idea of a computer and of much of modern technology as a whole is to see and to mimic how the human brain processes and stores information, we can gain valuable insights on how these computers have been optimized over time and draw conclusions about ourselves. So, let's break this analogy down. At the heart of all operations within a computer is communication between the central processing unit, or the CPU for short, and memory. The CPU, or the brain of the computer, is responsible for executing instructions and performing calculations. And remember, when we're discussing a decision-making process, at the end of the day, it really boils down to taking past information, funneling it into something that can interpret this information, and ultimately making a decision. So, consider we have a very fast CPU, something that can process a lot of information in a given amount of short time. Well, if we don't pair this very fast processor with enough memory, then our system at hand can't realize its full potential because it's being restricted on how much information can be flowed into it at a given amount of time. Similarly, if we have lots of memory but not enough actual processing power, this isn't a great combination either, because we can't utilize all of our information at hand effectively. And it's important to note, right, that these were the exact problems that computer architects and designers faced early on. However, over time, with the expansion of memory in computers, they were able to have quicker and more expansive decision-making processes. Think about it, right? This truly is the optimal combination. It's not just focusing in one direction, right? Just focusing on processing power, but it really is coupling that processing power with enough memory to be able to fully utilize the potential of our system. So, what am I getting at? Well, it's that the progress of optimizing a computer over time truly highlights the importance of a balance between memory and processing power. Similarly, in our own lives, it's crucial to strike a balance between external sources of memory and our own internal knowledge for continued cognitive functions of critical thinking and engagement. All of the decisions which we make depend on how much information and what type of information we can retain and process at a given time. To put this into perspective, consider a scenario where you can memorize and understand a whole library of legal documents. Well, in this case, you wouldn't only be considered one of the best lawyers in the world, but with retaining all of this knowledge and information, you can effectively streamline it into your unique decision-making process to make the best and the most well-informed decision when new information comes up. Now, so the future to me envisions a world where we risk losing these valuable aspects of our memory, all from an over-reliance on technology. This simple task at hand, which we rely on all the time, the use of technology to make shortcuts and ease in our lives, could very well be the cause of us gradually losing our capacity in our decision-making process because of the outsourcing and limited use of our memory. So, with all of this in mind, what is the solution? How can we be sure that we don't fall into the void of just consuming information without actually acting and thinking on it? Well, we all need to adopt a balanced approach to our technology usage. By no means am I up here today claiming that use of technology is the sole factor in a potential drop in our memory and subsequent reduction in our cognitive abilities. No. However, I am advocating for mindful usage of such tools. No matter who you are, what you do, or what you plan to do, think again about how you use technology when gathering information. Are you gaining valuable insights? Are you retaining this quest for knowledge? Or are you reflecting on different perspectives? Well, it's up for you to make that conclusion. However, I genuinely urge each and every one of you to reflect on your relationship with technology. Is it allowing you to get better understanding of a certain topic of interest? Or are you allowing it to dictate your thoughts and your actions? With mindful usage of technology and actively seeking valuable insights, we can all ensure that technology remains a tool and only a tool for mutual benefit, rather than serving as a barrier for critical thinking.